You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our dinner and dialogue gathering on February 26th, 2025. Thanks for tuning in. A year after I had cancer, this is probably 2011 or so, for Christmas, my brother got me an original Nintendo Entertainment System. It had the controllers, the Duck Hunt blaster, the cartridges you have to blow in to get them to work. You know, does anybody remember those? I can barely describe the feeling to you. First of all, I hadn't seen one in person in years, and I was beside myself excited. Have you ever found a childhood toy of yours later in life? Immediately, it just sort of sparked this joy within me that I didn't know was still down there. In fact, I think that joy was precisely why my brother got me this for Christmas that year. I feel like those closest to me had noticed that some of my joy had gone away. In fact, I remember my dad telling me at one time, "You know, Tim, you really don't laugh anymore." And I was like, wow, he might be right. So getting this Nintendo was a big deal because experiencing this joy after cancer was somehow new and fresh. It was this cohesion of nostalgia, childhood, and innocence commingled with what I had just endured in suffering, death, and inhumanity. And the feeling was really beyond words. You know, I still see videos that come through my Instagram feed of nostalgic 80s content that make me feel similarly. And that same warm feeling comes back. What is it about our childhood that we long for after things have gotten hard? I remember that same year at Christmas time, Kara and I were unboxing our Christmas ornaments as we were decorating the tree, and I found this little ornament given to me the year I was born. It was this little boy with a nightcap who was kneeling to pray. It was actually my very first Christmas ornament, and when I opened it, I just started weeping uncontrollably. What is that? What is that reckoning that happens within us when these little tokens of yesteryear expose this felt absence that we are no longer little children? I wonder if somehow that void within us can also create an opening that still knows that place of innocence. And I understand that not everyone's childhood was a walk in the park, that each of us grew up with different experiences of family and parents, or the lack thereof. But my wager is that each of us know the inner reality of childlikeness, even if it was only in flashes and didn't stick around all the time. We all know the innocence of existence that is so vital to tap into, not just when we're young, but for the whole of our lives. And that is what we're going to be discussing tonight. Listen to how a few of my favorite teachers have said it. And if you've been around our community a little while, you've likely heard me read these before. John O'Donohue says, "There is a place in you where you have never been wounded, where there is still a sureness in you, a seamlessness in you, and where there is a confidence and tranquility in you." Jim Finley says, "There is that within us that is not subject to the brutalities of the will of others. No matter what anyone does to us, this is that in us that no one can do anything to because it belongs completely to God." And then the mystic Meister Eckhart said, "There is a place in the soul where neither time nor space nor no created thing can ever touch." Now, I remember when I was going on my own inner journey through a dark night of the soul, and I would hear spiritual teachers I trusted say things like this, and I would go out on walks wondering to myself, could this really be true? You know, my doubts about it were a product of my experience with suffering. Like my dad had said to me, I had sort of lost my joy, and I didn't know where to find it. As a quick aside, I think this is the metaphor that the author of Peter Pan is playing with. You know, where Toodles, one of the lost boys, can't find his marbles in the real world, which are a symbol of his happy thoughts or the joy and innocence of childhood. The great stories and metaphors know about this critical journey of finding the second naïveté. I mean, that's what the wonderful Robin Williams had to do as Peter Pan in the film Hook, as an adult, right? He had to travel to a faraway magical land to remember what he had forgotten, what it was like to be a child. You see, each of us brush up against great trials in our lives, great challenges that become opportunities to carve out new depths within us. And each time we have to go, taste, and see for ourselves. Is it really still down there? Is that child still within me? Is there joy down there? Are there still happy thoughts to be thought? I know many of us have had to do this work, and the hard truth here is that we all know that there will be more challenges, more walls to break down ahead, more thresholds to cross in the future. In the 2012 film Liberal Arts, there's a professor who's speaking to one of his students, and he says perhaps the most profound thing I've heard in recent years. He's in his 60s or 70s, and he's speaking to a much younger person, and he says, since I was 19, I have never felt not 19. But I shave my face and I look in the mirror, and I'm forced to say this is not a 19-year-old staring back at me. Nobody feels like an adult. It's the world's dirty secret. When I first watched that clip, my jaw about hit the floor. That's it, I thought to myself. That's everything I've wanted to say about the second naivete in a nutshell. Do you ever feel like me? We all know how to play the grown-up game, right? But the world's dirty little secret is that nobody feels like an adult. I hear this from my elder friends who visibly show signs of aging on the outside, but they tell me, Tim, I don't feel old inside. I feel like I'm still a kid on some level. We are all longing to come home to wonder and awe and joy, and to see the world through the eyes of a child. What does it take to recover this childlikeness within us? Remember, we're not talking about childishness here. We're talking about childlikeness. Childishness is the first naivete, dualistic thinking, us versus them games, shame and blame. In terms of our own tradition, it could be biblical literalism and the whole bunch. But childlikeness is such an admirable quality as an adult, isn't it? I remember the first time I met my friend, Father Larry, who was a Franciscan monk over at the mission here in Santa Barbara. I know some of you know him, but immediately I saw this innocence in his eyes and in his spirit. There was a playfulness and a presence to him. He's someone who, when you encounter him, the veil of presence feels very thin. Like you can access that joy inside him without any barriers at all to it. Maybe you know someone like this. So over these past weeks, we've been asking, how do we access this? We've been discussing the thoughts, the emotions, the fears, the lack of self-welcome that can all get in the way of us finding our way towards some second innocence. And last week, we spoke a bit about self-welcome as one threshold that we can cross in order to allow the second naivete to consolidate within us. I love that author Adrienne Marie Brown says that ultimately, love for the self is the deepest pleasure that we deny ourselves. She said that she works daily to be courageous enough to indulge in the purest pleasure, which is self-love. It's when we're able to welcome all parts of ourselves, when we create a space within us for each thought, each emotion, each fear to take up residence, to arise and pass without judgment, that we can access that point within us where we are living from our true selves. And if you've lived through a little life, and especially a little loss, maybe you too have carried this question. Do I still have the capacity for joy within me? Can I still reach in there and grab it? And no doubt, our world is really setting the table for us to wonder this, isn't it? Our political, environmental, societal, and economic realities can be harrowing. And when we're being tossed around in the chaos of those systems and structures that oppress us, sometimes, not always, but sometimes it can feel like they're out to swallow up both yours and my joy. But here's the secret. they don't have the right or the power to do so. Again, Brown says that she lives with this deep and irreplaceable knowledge of her capacity for joy that comes to demand from all her life that it be lived within the knowledge that the satisfaction of joy is always possible. The second naivete is about the possibility of joy. And joy is a resistance to death-dealing realities. Joy is what restores our humanity. We have to come to know in the most fully embodied way possible that the satisfaction of joy is always a possibility. And trust me, in the months and years to come with this administration, we will need to tap into this kind of resilience and resistance. I love that the mystic Thomas Merton said that what is serious to humanity is often very trivial in the sight of God. But what in God might appear to us as play is perhaps what God takes most seriously. I think this is why Jesus is quoted as having said, "Let the little children come to me. Don't stop them. For the kingdom of God," remember, that's Jesus' word for this inner reality that we're talking about. The kingdom of God belongs to those who are like these children, to those who are childlike. So, if we're looking for the second naivete, just ask yourself, where is there space for play in my life? Where do I get a sense of some sparking joy in my day-to-day? What internal and external barriers are there to play and to joy? You know, I often think of my dad, who's in his 70s now, but who grew up in the 50s, when Westerns were all the rage for kids with parents who were born just as the Wild West was fading away. And little kids in that time ran around playing what? Cowboys. And yes, I mean, I know it's super colonial, right? But here's my point. You know what I see him doing these days? When he's got a movie on in the background and he sends me a message, it's a Turner Classic Movie Western, right? And I wonder if that reminds him of his childhood. And I was then raised in the era of sci-fi. You know, it was a genre that really had just gotten started at the time that my parents were growing up. And most of the movies I remember watching growing up were of that genre. My brother and I shared a room, and every night when we were going to sleep, as we talked, you know, we wouldn't play cowboys, we played spaceships. In fact, I have this E.T. poster in my office that reminds me of my childhood and that time. And just last year, for my 40th birthday, my brother got us a trip over to Universal Studios to go on E.T. the Ride. Because again, I think he instinctively knew the joy that we could tap in together. I'm coming to believe that each of us, in our own ways, keep our childlikeness before us as best we can, because we're longing to come home to that place. So perhaps this encouragement in discovering the inner child again is that although it can sometimes feel like it, we can't actually lose it. It just goes missing like Toodle's marbles. And if the adventure of spirituality is the art of coming home to ourselves once again, maybe the goal is to do what we can to practice joy as resistance and resilience in a difficult time. Spend time with your kids or your grandkids. Surround yourself with people with whom you can laugh and play. Find a game or a sport or a hobby that restores the felt sensation of being a child in your body. Go on a walk with no destination and learn to wander again. Because there will be plenty of crying to do, will there not? And there's a time and a place for that, and it's necessary. But my hope and my prayer for each of us on the journey is that your veil may be thin and your access to joy might be uninhibited, so that it can restore you, rejuvenate you, and ultimately welcome you into that unwounded place within you where you are grounded, safe, loved, and able to give that love freely back to the world. May it be so. Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.